Hi, I'm Judith Dreyer. Thank you for joining me for this podcast series, The Holistic Nature of Us. My intent is to take us, you and I, into a better understanding of the concepts behind our holistic nature and how that ties directly to the holistic nature of the world around us. How can we connect the dots in practical ways that we are nature and nature is in us? I will be featuring authors and educators, practitioners and others whose passion for this earth helps us create bridges. We'll see what's trending, what's relevant to our world today, not just for land use, but to connect the dots between ourselves and nature. It's time for practical action and profound inner change so our natural world is valued once again. Today I'm delighted to introduce you to Gunther Hauk. Gunther is the founder of Spikenard Farm in Floyd, Virginia. It is a bee sanctuary that incorporates biodynamic farming principles. He's also the co-founder of the Pfeiffer Center in New York City, and he's featured in the documentary Queen of the Sun. Welcome, Gunther. I'm so happy to have you today.
Well, thank you for having me.
So I always like to start with my guest's story. How did you get into the Waldorf school and the biodynamic farming? Tell us more about your journey.
I have to go back to 1971. I was teaching at Allegheny College in Pennsylvania and was dissatisfied with my profession there, teaching college students. And so I quit my job, telling the president that I would stay on for the rest of the school year. And then a hippie in Detroit sent me a book after talking to him, How to Know Higher Worlds by Rudolf Steiner. And after reading that, I went to the library and there was one lecture by Steiner, The New Art of Education. And when I read that, I knew why I had given notice. And 9 months later, I had sold my house and the car and a lot of other things and was in Germany doing the Waldorf training. And I started out at the original Waldorf school, which was founded 100 years ago next year, 1919, in Stuttgart. I became an English teacher, foreign language teacher in Germany, and then I got into gardening. And that was, for me, actually a wonderful experience. There was a beautiful, beautiful biodynamic garden for the children, and it was just wonderful. It was really a holistic garden. It had some animals, it had orchards, berries, flowers, bees, and vegetables. And the children really got a wonderful education in that. So that's how I got into biodynamics, because that was the basis for working the garden, was biodynamic agriculture. And that was given by Rudolf Steiner in 1924. 8 lectures to about 100 farmers and gardeners. And those were not necessarily small ones. The biggest one had 19,500 acres. So
Wow.
Those professional people,
Yes.
And that's the basis of biodynamics. Biodynamic agriculture are those lectures. And in 5.5 more years, we'll be celebrating the 100-year anniversary there.
Interesting. So you took those principles and you decided to be a teacher in the Waldorf school and teach these principles, correct, to the children?
Well, they are taught in a very indirect way. In other words, we ran the garden. We worked the garden in all aspects. And of course, the children would sometimes spray a certain preparation on the land. And depending on the age, you didn't say too much, but they would experience the vitality and radiance and the taste of the food. It's like one student whom I met later as a shoe salesman. He said, "I never tasted tomatoes like at your garden." And so it's the experience that did it, not the teaching itself.
So tell us something about the principles of biodynamic farming.
Well, I can say that solid, good organic principles are the basis for biodynamic farming. In other words, crop diversity, not monocultures, crop rotation, compost, building up the humus instead of just giving mineral fertilizers, NPK. Those are the basic principles. And biodynamic goes beyond that by stimulating the life processes, not so much adding substances. If they are added, it's in homeopathic form. Very, very small quantities are given.
So let's talk about that. One of my heroines is Vandana Shiva and all the work she's done with seed saving and the education that she imparts around the world. And of course, you and I both know that the use of synthetic fertilizers denatures the soil. It actually deadens the soil. It doesn't rejuvenate or regenerate it. And that's a holistic principle, right? Is to have the soil be regenerative and sustainable.
Exactly. So interesting. In 1924, when Steiner was asked to give these lectures, the farmers, the observable degradation had already begun, and the farmers noticed that. In other words, they noticed a decrease in soil fertility and the fertility of the animals. And that's why they asked Steiner to give some advice and insights into the problem. So just 3 decades of conventional fertilizing was actually noticeably bad for the health of the animals and the people and everything.
And what puzzles me is that when you have farmers getting together and observe this, I find it odd that monocrop agriculture has taken such root and such a hold on our agricultural system when it really doesn't make sense in the long run.
Well, it's interesting. Justus von Liebig, the father of modern chemical agriculture, who invented this NPK. In other words, basic substances have to be given back into the fields when you take off the fruit of these fields, the harvest. And later in his year, toward the end of his life, he realized that equation only works where the humus is depleted. In other words, where you have 4, 5, 6% humus in the soil, that equation didn't work anymore. But his followers just ran with that basic principle. Oh yeah, you got to put back what you take out, and they ignored his later findings. And then what gave a great boost for conventional agriculture, what is now conventional agriculture, was the end of World War I, because the nitrogen factories that produced the nitrogen for ammunition didn't have a market, and then they told the farmers that's what you can use it for, the nitrogen. So that's how conventional farming got a real boost in the 20s and 30s.
Yeah, and especially again after World War II, what folks don't realize is that nitrogen's is addictive. The more you put in, the more you have to keep adding in. The more you keep adding in, the less the microbes and the microorganisms take up the nitrogen in the soil. So it's this never-ending cycle that I'd like to see broken, where we can pay attention to nature more and its principles and apply them in our gardening, such as what you've learned and what you teach so beautifully through your farm to build up the soil. And I'm a member of the Bionutrient Food Association. I don't know if you've heard of them, but
yes.
they have some great information on soil building, and people haven't connected the dot that if we have really good, healthy soil, we have far more nutritious food as the outcome. That creates better health in us as the human being, as well as in our animals, the animal kingdom.
Exactly. Well, agriculture used to be the basis for culture, and our present day agriculture is also becoming the base for our culture. In other words, depleted and not holistic, actually, degrading and damaging rather than healing. So we have to go back to holistic principles, and these require actually a mindset that is different than our present one. It actually calls for a paradigm shift.
It does, and unfortunately, that happens literally from the ground up. So for us to make a change as a culture, it's going to happen one garden, one farmer, one next door neighbor at a time to try to make that difference in the mindset. I do a lot of talks. I go to garden clubs and all, and I'm always amazed and surprised and saddened that some of these beautiful, beautiful gardeners who have their hands in the soil, that love being in the soil, continue to use something like a Roundup product in their garden. And they said, well, I got to get rid of it right now, so I'm using it. And that's the mentality. And unfortunately, that is not a sustainable mindset. We need to think about future generations.
Exactly. Yeah, that's so true. You know, a former farmer used to be proud to leave to the next generation a soil that had maybe 0.5% more humus. And now we take pride in getting the most out of any soil. In other words, what can I get out of it? You know, how many pounds, how many bushels or whatever. It's a different mindset. It's one of exploitation and degradation, I can only say.
But it's also a mindset of give me, I want, I'm going to take because I can. And, I see that with the tree people. I see that, with biodynamic farming. They're up against this sort of a brainwashing kind of mentality of the corporate bottom line comes first. And hopefully, again, from the bottom up, we can change that mindset. Could you talk to us a little bit about carbon in the soil? I find that's something that most gardeners really aren't that aware of, and most of us as consumers are not aware of carbon in the soil and how important that is.
Yes. So enriching your soil with humus, you're enriching the soil with carbon. But not only carbon. It goes into other substances and trace minerals, enzymes, and so on. So carbon is the basic substance, if I talk spiritually, with which the spiritual world forms anything, whether it's a plant, whether it's an animal or the human body. We all have the carbon. And this basic structure is carbon. And that then is enlivened with oxygen, which is the carrier of life forces. And then comes in the nitrogen, which is the carrier of the astral forces, the soul forces. In other words, that lets an animal or a human being have feelings and motion and emotion. So carbon is that very basic substance with which the sculpting of form is accomplished by the spiritual world, all the way up from the hierarchies down to the elemental beings.
That's fascinating. I've never heard it explained quite in that way. My research has shown that emissions is one issue for putting excess carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, but if we keep growing more small farms in our backyards and our neighborhoods, putting in more diversity, we actually can capture some of that carbon and bring it back into the soil.
Yes, that's true. But what a lot of people don't know is that nitrogen is about 20 times as effective as carbon responsible for global warming. And we don't touch that because then we would have to change our basic agriculture with all the input of nitrogen. And of course, the nitrogen is then washed out into the rivers, into the oceans, and we have the wonderful blooms in Florida, in the oceans, that tell us that we're doing something wrong. So nitrogen is really also very heavily used, and we are just using it too much to grow fast and big fruits. And that does not have anything to say with about quality.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't, and we forget that. Again, because of our advertising, we forget the principle behind having healthy food. You know, we overlook it for the sake of cosmetics, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, can I add something to that?
Sure.
We are just surrounded with so many lies. Like, you need the conventional agriculture to feed the world. Well, if we stop wasting a quarter of the food, which we are in America, and if we eat a little bit more judiciously, we can feed a lot more people. And a lot of food gets wasted in transport and other things. So the Rodale Institute, having worked on organic principles for 40, 50, 60 years, they have proven that in a 10-year study, they can produce as much as conventional agriculture because the plants are more resilient to drought and to wetness and so on. So that's a lie that we cannot feed the world with organic agriculture. I mean, there are so many lies out there, and you don't even have to look into politics to see them,
That's true, and that's what I'm hoping with this podcast, is to sort of bust up some of the lies with really good expertise, research, experience that says, here's the deal. Do you want to eat a watered down, pale tomato from Big Ag, or do you want to have an organic tomato? And you can taste the difference. So we have to keep at it, keep getting the word out there. Gunther, could you tell us about Spikenard Farm? I know it's a bee sanctuary. You do biodynamic principles there. Tell us about your farm.
Well, we have 25 acres, and soon we'll have 14 more acres. It's in the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains. And we are just lucky we have an organic farm next door and just pastures and forests around us. So we are not in danger with the GMOs as much as in other places. So we have built up a beautiful honeybee sanctuary and teach sustainable and biodynamic beekeeping methods there. So people come actually from all over the United States, Canada, Mexico, and other countries, 5, 6 European countries, Australia, Israel. We have people from all over the world coming to learn really good beekeeping methods. And of course, you cannot separate the land from the bees. So whatever you do to the land also is done for the animals and the human being. So biodynamic is for us the only way we can actually do something good for the bees, aside from planting a lot of good beneficial pollinator plants. So people come and they are amazed, and in just a few years, we have built up a really vibrant and beautiful sanctuary with gardens, a vegetable garden and pollinator gardens. And that's the biodynamic preparations that we use that are responsible for that vitality. People actually notice it coming into the sanctuary, that there is something different about it.
That's true. I had the wonderful pleasure of visiting you folks a few years ago when I lived in Virginia, and being around the bees and the beautiful wild flowers and wildflowers, not to mention the garden, was just a real treasure, in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Thanks to you folks and the deep commitment you have to the teaching, and the folks that you touch all over the world. Could you give us like 3 tips that people could take home today that they could apply?
Yes, I think maybe I can. Yes, if you think about agriculture again as the basis of culture, what does it do to the land, to the oceans, to the rivers? Is a monoculture the right thing? You see, it's so interesting. The Industrial Revolution was great, for many things. We don't have to work as hard with our hands. We can use machines for many things. But the laws of industry are 180-degree different from the laws of nature. So the laws of industry are get as big as you can to outdo the competition, specialize on one thing, and become location independent. And the laws of nature are diversity, not specialization. There are limits to growth, you don't have 20-foot people around, limits to growth, and every farm, every garden is located in a unique place on this earth. So going with the laws of industry, that has actually taken us into this deep crisis we are in. Some people don't even realize the deep crisis we are in with food, with agriculture, with the bees. The bees are just the tip of the iceberg. So coming back to laws of nature and reading about it, studying is one thing. In other words, nothing has been as comprehensive, as holistic as Rudolf Steiner's work. And basic book is Theosophy, which explains what is the human being, what is an animal, what is a plant, and what is the earth as a living being, and so on. So that would be one thing that is really beneficial to the individual and beneficial to a lot of things if you start reading something that has a spiritual impact like that. And then if you want to learn about biodynamics, I can say you can come to a workshop we give, especially for biodynamic preparations. We make the preparations and explain them. It's actually in a way good and in a way sad that biodynamic was introduced to Rodale, the old Rodale. He learned from Aaron Pfeiffer. But the way the preparations are made is sometimes too strange for a modern mind. So he chucked that and went organic. And now people are trying to catch up with the spiritual side of agriculture. More and more interest is present for biodynamic agriculture, which gives you also the spiritual aspects. So one thing, understanding more.
Gunther, let me ask you this. Your workshops, are they available online as well? Do you have any tutorials online?
Not on biodynamics. Our young coworker, Alex, just gave a 12-part webinar on beekeeping this year and probably will do it next year too. So actually, to demonstrate how these preparations are made, the experience is much more valuable than just reading about it. Mm-hmm. Reading about it can turn you off. You put this into a stag bladder and you think those people are crazy. They probably dance naked at the full moon or something like that.
Yes, we're silly, aren't we, with our assumptions? That's
But
funny. That's funny.
there is a logic in all of that, but you have to be very open in your mind to understand synergy and true holistic thinking. It's interesting that the word holistic is etymologically, historically connected to the word whole, W-H-O-L-E, to make things whole and to make things holy. So we have to discover the sacred in agriculture and in us and our surroundings again. So it's actually one thing. And the word holistic has become a slogan, a good one, and just calls for also the sacred and to think broader, not so, narrow as we are taught to think.
That's true. And for me, the concept of holism goes beyond what we think of in the alternative health field, the mind, body, spirit. That's beautiful, wonderful. It got us to where we are today in some of our understandings. But for me, you cannot have a functioning whole if the parts aren't working right. And the earth has parts that aren't working right. And my deep desire is to see us go back to that holistic model to get the parts in harmony again, in sync again, because that's how we are created. Our physical body absolutely has communities. They know exactly what to do. A liver knows what to do versus a pancreas.
Mm-hmm.
It's interconnected, and when we feel healthy, it's because everybody's doing their part and they're all functioning the way they should be. So today we're facing the crisis of global warming with severe storms, fires, etc., heating, and that to me is a symptom that we are not listening to.
Yes, but I think that we should also be grateful for the crisis, because
Yes.
the crisis wakes us up.
Mm-hmm.
And if we listen, a crisis always, whether personal or on a broader scale, tells us that the path we have taken is not the right one.
You're absolutely right, and that's a very, very good reminder. So, Gunther, before we close today, could you please give us your contact information, the farm, etc.?
I'll be glad to. So you can find us online on our website. It's Spikenard Farm, Spikenard, spikenardfarm.org. We are a nonprofit organization, so that's why we got the org there. And you find everything else, our email and our telephone number, how to contact us. A lot of information is on there about plants, about the bees, about frequently asked questions. A lot of information is on our website.
Yes, it's a beautiful website, and they do have a lot of information. I encourage all my listeners to check them out. Gunther, do you have anything else to add before we close?
I think what we have to do is look west, as you put out. In the West there is reverence. Mm-hmm. Actually, all of it. The holism in the East, the sustainability in the South, the reverence in the West, the intelligence in the North, and the intuition within. We cannot go further without intelligence. In other words, we can't just chuck our minds, that what we have developed over 500 years now. So use that in order to reach out broader. Develop the reverence for everything. A blade of grass is as precious as your bank account, or maybe even more. And sustainability, what is truly sustainability, is a big question. So we could talk more.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's I love your wisdom, and thank you for sharing that.
You're very welcome, and reach out to us if you're interested in biodynamics and the bees, and we'll reach out to you.
Great. All right, well, I want to thank you, Gunther, for joining us at Holistic Nature of Us. I'm inspired by you. I was inspired when I visited you folks a few years ago. I love your practical advice and your wisdom that comes from your experience. So this is Judith Dreyer, author of At the Gardenscape book and blog. I am so delighted for you joining us today. Um, Please note that my book is available through my website, which is www.judithdreyer, that's DREYER.com, as well as several distribution arms, including Amazon, Nook, etc. I'd like to remind all of you to please like and share the podcast. Let's get the word out. Every podcast has a written transcription as well, so the contact information and also other suggestions are easily found through the transcript. So it's time for us now to really think about practical action and profound interchange, so our world is valued once again. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.